There's a couple of things that you may know about Zoom if you are a regular user of Zoom. The first one is that there is a chat function. I'm just going to put a note in the chat so that you can see where that is. So let me just put here's the chat. And I'd love today, if you get the chance, I'd love to kind of hear your input. So if there's anything you want to contribute or ask, feel free to put it in the chat. If you've got any questions, or as we go through it, if you think you just like to go a bit deeper on something, or if you'd like an alternative perspective, just drop it in the chat and I'll make sure that I keep an eye on that and respond to anything that comes up. There is also a reactions button. So again, it's on your toolbar. You've got the chat there and you've also got reactions. Zoom just recently changed this. They introduced interactive reactions that go across the screen. You can see those rockets going up in front of me now. So that's a new addition to Zoom recently. But there is also a raise hand function. The raise hand function could be useful if you've got a question, when we come to the Q&A at the end, or if there's anything that you want to clarify, then if you raise your hand, I'll immediately be alerted that you've raised your hand, and then I'll be able to see who would like to contribute and speak. If you just final bit of admin, then we'll get started. If you haven't got your name displayed on Zoom and you want to change it, above the box on your name, there's a mute button, and there are three little dots to the top right. If you click the three little dots and then go down to rename, you can change the name that you're displaying on Zoom if you want to do that. So you could call yourself anything you want. Sometimes you have like those childhood ambitions to be called something different. I had a brother, I've still got a brother. My brother used to want to be called Lightning as a child. So if you fancy being called Lightning or Thunderbolt, feel free, fill your boots. Okay, so let's talk about today's session. We're going to talk about maximising sales at any event that you attend or any exhibition that you're attending where you're there representing the company and you're engaging customers. Now, today's session is all about creating some thinking space. What we find in this kind of modern environment, the modern working world, is that thinking space is really rare. We tend to have to-do lists that we never get to the end of. There's always something coming in at us, whether that be from social media, lead generation, requests internally, and then of course proactively trying to drive your own business and growth. There's so much going on that thinking space is quite precious. So I'd love to invite you all just to do whatever you need to do just to concentrate this lunchtime and create a bit of thinking space. Some of the ideas we'll talk about this lunchtime, you'll think, okay, that's good, I'm doing that. Some of the ideas hopefully are going to make you start to think differently and give you an alternative perspective from perhaps one that you've had in the past. And if you're part of a team today, these will be useful ideas that you can think about as you participate in your team at events and exhibitions. So hopefully lots of key insights. We are recording the session and you'll get access to this session afterwards as well. So the BDIA and I will contact you. This is a webinar on behalf of not only my business, but in partnership with the BDIA, who I work very closely with on these kind of programs. So today we're going to talk about the events and event management in general. We'll talk about the sales process and understanding the sales process. We'll talk a bit about stand etiquette. It sounds a little bit old-fashioned, and I think it probably is, but it's something that I was taught years ago when I attended my first exhibition. It's always stuck with me. And I think it'd be useful just to go over some really simple principles around stand etiquette that seem obvious, but sometimes, as they say, common sense isn't always common practice. So sometimes we just need a reminding of those foundations. Then we'll talk about how to maximize engagement of your potential customers when you're at an event. We'll talk about the structure for a sales conversation, and I can give you some tips about how to ask good questions and really think about how to engage customers the best way possible. Then we'll talk about the importance of follow-up. And then we have an event, the BDIA and Focus for Growth are running an event in February next year. I'd love to just share some details of that right at the end of today, and then we'll go into Q&A. So I'd love this session to be interactive as well, which I'll get to in a moment. Before I do that, for some of you, this might be the first time you've seen me speak. I'll just give you a quick history, because whenever I attend events like this, the first thing I think is, who is this guy and how does he know that he can share anything of value with me? And it's the right question to ask. So my background is actually, I started out in dentistry. about 35 years ago, I started out as a dental technician. I had 4 years in the laboratory, realized I didn't want to do that for the rest of my career, and then transitioned into a sales role. And I started out in retail sales. I had a couple of years working for one of the big distributors. Then I moved into manufacturer or wholesale repping sales. Worked for the Dentsply for about 4 years, and then moved into a key account management role. Then I went to 3M in 1999, again in dental, as a key account manager, then became a sales manager. And then I moved out of dentistry and I started to lead different sales teams within 3M, then business teams, became a general manager, had quite a career at 3M, ended up managing their medical solutions division, which was their largest UK division, until about 2017, 18. Then I realized I'd hit the kind of ceiling of my corporate career and decided to do something different. So I moved then into coaching, retrained as an executive coach, and started working with my own clients. And that brought me back into dentistry. So I do a lot of work with dental clients and medical clients. So that's my background. I've learned a lot. I've had a lot of investment in my personal and professional development over the years and been really grateful for that. And recognized actually when I started to work for myself that isn't as common as we might like it to be. So actually a lot of the companies and the businesses that I work with, myself and in collaboration with the BDIA, we see that actually some of the things that creep in are sometimes just simple things like lack of engagement, perhaps some inconsistencies, perhaps a little bit of negativity, especially if you have a really challenging role in your business. Then actually it's really easy for that to start to affect performance. So some of the things that we do really simply, and we'll cover some of these today, just get back to foundations. Think about the importance of being engaged in your role, the importance of being positive, the importance of consistency. And that consistency and that positivity starts to improve performance, and the performance improves results. And it's so obvious when you say it like that, but it's very often not the case. We don't always have that. We don't always join up the dots between what we know works and what will drive to results and growth. And the other thing I've been really proud of, I think, is that I wrote this book in 2020 called Inspire, Influence, Sell. If you haven't read it, I would definitely recommend it. I would recommend it because, of course, I wrote it. But the feedback from people who have read it is really, really positive. And, of course, it's the foundation of a lot of the work that we do to train and coach people who are in sales roles. And a lot of what we'll cover today are principles from that book. So let's get into some stuff. First of all, I'd love to run a quick poll from the people who are attending today. So let me just launch this poll and then I'll tell you what it is. So you should now see a poll in front of you. When we think about events and leads, I'd love to hear your perspective. This is according to Momencio research. So what percentage of leads do you think aren't followed up after a trade show on average? This is from the research that this company has done. They run lots of trade show events. So there's 6 options on the 29%, 39%, 49%, 59%, 69%, 79%. So I'd love to hear, what do you think is the percentage of leads that aren't followed up after a trade show? So, thank you, brilliant. We've got some great answers. I think we've got 70%, 80% of you have voted. Good. I'll just give you another, 85, 90. Oh, wow, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, I think everybody's voted. Superb. Thanks so much. That was super quick. Normally, we have to give all sorts of encouragement to get polls voted. So here's what you voted. Thanks, everybody, for voting. So 6% of you, one person thought 29%. 7 of you, 39% thought it was 39%. 3 of you, 17% thought it was 49%. 3 more of you, 17%, thought it was 59%. The same again for 69%. And 1 of you, 60% of you, thought it was 79%. So well done to the one person that guessed or thought it was 79%. Now, when I read these stats, it always absolutely staggers me that it is 79%. So 79% of leads aren't followed up after a trade show. We're going to talk a bit about how to combat that as we go through today's session. But I'd love to hear, just get you thinking ahead of, as we go into today's content. Just put in the chat one thing you'd like to get from today's session. I've got an agenda, I've got some content, but I just want to make sure that whatever you came here for, you get today. So if there's one thing that's on your mind as you think about events, and there's one thing you kind of, as you were coming in thinking, I'd like to know this, just drop it in the chat, and as we go through today, start to think about what is it, the one thing, and I will make sure that we address that, or at least answer it if it's not already planned to be in today's presentation. So in your own time, just a quick note in the chat, and I'll make sure that I pick that up before we close today's session. So I wanted to share some stats with you. And the first one was just an assessment of how much it costs to attend a trade event or an exhibition or a show. And this is some work that was kind of done off the back of some of the average costings by this company, Booth Exhibits. And I want to share with you, because I don't know if you are aware of this. I've not seen this before, but so if you look at 3 people attending an average event at a trade show, then the average cost, if you look at the stand space, the venue services, travel, accommodation, meals, subsistence, all that stuff, is around £23,000. And if you look at 6 people attending an event, it's around £36,500. If you look at 9 people attending an event, it's around £58,000. And of course, those numbers go up as you increase the number of people that attend a trade event from your organization. And the one thing that we probably don't fully appreciate is if that's how much it costs to attend an event, if you think about the average profitability of an organization, let's say it's about 20% operating profit. So the profit is how much money the company makes after all the costs have happened, people, products, expenses, all that stuff. Normally 20% is a pretty good, pretty strong profit. So if you then say, well, if the profit that we need to generate to cover that show is £23,000 just to break even, it means we have to generate £116,500 worth of sales. And if we think about 6 people attending an event and it being £36,500, then we need to generate £183,000 worth of sales just to break even on the event. And then finally, we think about 9 people attending an event and it being £58,000 cost. We need to generate £291,000 worth of sales. And this was something that I only discovered really and understood the significance of when I was actually managing a business. And we used to commit to trade events, and we used to then try and calculate the return on investment and figure out, okay, what level of sales do we need to generate to make this event pay off? Now, sometimes there are different objectives for shows. We won't cover that today, but we can cover it in a future session. You might think that actually brand awareness is important, establishing yourself in the marketplace, reviewing with existing customers to maintain loyalty. They can all be objectives that you have within a show that would be alongside your revenue goals. So it may not be as simple a calculation as revenue to profitability, but actually it's worth understanding this as we start to think, okay, how do we make the biggest impact in a trade show? What it says to me is we absolutely have to maximize the engagement with customers. Thanks so much, everyone, for your comments in the chat. I'll get to those as we go through. In fact, I'm going to read a few of those out now just to make sure that we are clear on it. So Monica says, thanks, Monica. I like to get information on getting passers-by to stop at the stand. We'll definitely cover that. Thank you, Monica. Mark, thank you, Mark. New ideas and perspectives to support conversion of leads into sales. Yeah, great. Thanks, Mark. Mirren, thank you, Mirren. I'm an event organizer, so keen to hear how we can help the sales team reach their goals with the aid of event design. Brilliant. Thank you, Mirren. And Jan, I love this. How to get rid of time wasters when lots of people are waiting to speak to you. So actually sometimes qualifying people out rather than qualifying them in. That's really useful, Jan. I will talk to that. It's not part of today's structure, but I'll give you some ideas on that as well. Okay, so how do we maximize sales at events? Let's talk about some ideas here. So first of all, I'll talk about a bit about stand etiquette. The first time I attended a big event and exhibition, I was working for a very large dental company, and that we were all asked to go to the event that we were going to. This was a trade show at Birmingham. It used to be 3 days, so it used to be Thursday, Friday, and the Saturday. And we would all go up on the Thursday, and the Thursday would be a day where the event organisers were setting up the stands and marketing were dressing the stand, as they called it, and the sales team would then go into pre-event training. And we'd have at least an afternoon talking about expectations for the event. And there's a brilliant video. I tried to find it for today's session, but it's locked behind a paywall. You can't get it anymore. It used to be like an on-demand video, but you can't access it now. But it's a training video by John Cleese and Andrew Sachs. They were the comedy duo out of Faulty Towers, and they basically do this skit at an exhibition show where they're sitting on a stand and customers are walking past, and they're sitting there smoking and they're drinking and eating, and the stand's a mess, and then someone comes along when they're talking to a customer, starts clearing up around them, and it's a bit farcical, but actually there's some really interesting key messages that land with you when you think about stand etiquette. And I just want to go through, I'm not going to go through all of that, but I do want to talk about 4 points that I was taught early on and were really useful for me. And the first one we've kind of touched on already, around eating and drinking on the stand. I'd say, if you think about it, you wouldn't expect someone to talk to you if you were in the middle of eating or in the middle of a meal, and you certainly wouldn't take your meal to a client meeting. In fact, many of you will be doing lunch meetings, I'm sure, and I'm sure you don't eat during the lunch meetings. You let the customer eat while you are then talking to them and having a sales conversation. And it's the same on a stand. And it's interesting. I've seen it so many times when I attend exhibitions and events, and when I've led teams at events and exhibitions where, I might have to have a quiet word with my team and just say, oh, do you mind, taking your lunch off to one side, or take it to, a table and chairs or a restaurant area or dining area, because people don't always just think about the implications, because it just looks really messy. It creates a barrier to the customer, and we want to reduce all barriers to the customer being able to visit us and get on the stand. So no eating and drinking on the stand. I'd say the only exception to that is if you have a bottle of water, or just a water container that you would take a drink out of, but it's out of sight and it's managed. It's not making things look untidy. The second thing is about phones. So in the first few exhibitions I went to, mobile phones weren't really a big thing. They were there as a phone, not as a device that you could access apps and social media on. And what we don't realize is that when you're on your phone, time just slips away. And if you're unconsciously scrolling on a phone, even for what seems like seconds, before you know it, it's minutes, and you will have missed the opportunity to engage with people and make eye contact and actually create the best opportunities from the show. So I'd say, where you can, actually, phones on silent, put them to one side, schedule your breaks, and when you have breaks, then you pick up the phone. And it sounds obvious when I say it, but I attend a lot of shows and I see so many people on stands distracted by their phones. It's really interesting. Customers won't interrupt you so that you stop scrolling. They will walk straight by. So we have to remember, phones down, eyes up. I really like that as a kind of as a saying for stand etiquette. And then the third point is around how we engage with our colleagues on stands. Now, you will have really good relationships with your colleagues. And what I've seen happen and what I've experienced myself is that if you have a couple of salespeople on a stand that are chatting, it looks like a conversation. When you get more than two, or you have three or more, it starts to look like a clique. And when you see a clique, you don't feel like you can interrupt or break into that. And the customer won't interrupt your internal discussion. They'll tend to walk on by. So I always think, no huddling on stands. If you're going for a break with somebody else, take that off the stand so that you're not creating a barrier to people coming on. And all barriers aren't created equal. They're not just physical barriers. Very often they can just be the body language that a customer sees creates a barrier to them wanting to say hi or engage. And then the fourth one, of course, is the most important, which is body language. It's about looking alive, looking lively. Body language is really important when we're at events and exhibitions. So if you're slouching and you look tired or bored, this is particularly important on like day two, or if you're on a single day at the end of the day, towards the end of the day, perhaps the last break. If your body language says I'm tired and bored, a customer kind of tunes out straight away. So we want to smile, we want to make the right eye contact, which we'll talk about next. And remember that we're the shop window to that stand. We want to be attractive. We want to encourage and welcome people in. We don't want to be a barrier to entry. It's the worst thing we can create in terms of an environment for our stand. And then, oh, I've got an extra, just to pick up, Natasha's also said ideas to maximize engagement at every opportunity possible in terms of today's objectives. Thank you, Natasha. That's great. Well, hopefully you're already starting to see that we're going to work through that as part of the session. So that's kind of stand etiquette. I want to talk about the stages of decision making for the customer and the journey that the customer goes on, whether this is at an event or an exhibition, or actually more broadly in your sales conversations. And then I want to help you understand how the sales process lines up with those stages of decision making, because this is really critical. Once we understand this, we have to make sure that wherever we are in the sales conversation, we are matching the customer and where they are in their decision making stage. Because if we get that wrong, if we're misaligned, we will find that it's much more difficult to get commitment from the customer, and you might just get a placating, oh yeah, that sounds interesting, I'll think about it, and they'll walk away. That's what happens when we're misaligned with the customer. So let's talk about the customer journey. I want to talk a little bit about the funnel. So we think about the traditional sales funnel. It always looks like that, wider at the top than it is at the bottom. And it makes this assumption that gravity naturally draws opportunity down through the sales funnel. And those of you who are in sales and have been in sales for a while, you will know that nothing could be further from the truth, and that actually gravity works against us in the sales process. Our job is to pull customers up through the different stages of the funnel. If we don't take that responsibility, they drop back down. So it's a really good visual and a reminder for us all about how it's our responsibility to draw customers through the process. But let's talk about, we're going to see customer decision-making stages on the left. We're going to see sales process stages on the right. So the customer starts their journey unaware, especially a cold prospect. You're at an event or an exhibition. Customer walks up past your stand. They're unaware of the value that you can add. And we think about preparation. So today is in part preparation to be able to engage that customer. So you think about, okay, what messages am I going to deliver to the customer? What questions might I ask? How do I establish rapport? How do I get their engagement? That's all part of the preparation. Once you get that preparation right and you feel confident to approach that customer, this can be in an event setting, or it can be more generally, more broadly in your territory as a territory setting, then that preparation enables you to connect with the customer in the first instance and get positive attention. Once you have positive attention, the first step in our sales approach is to share some insights, share some information with the customer that they might not know. Because what we want to do is get them to think differently, and we want to get them to lean in and perhaps ask us some questions related to that insight. And once you get that engagement from a customer, you move them from attention to interest. That leaning in is moving them across their decision-making stages to interest. Now, when you get a customer interested, you get them from unaware to attentive to interested. That bit's quite straightforward. Okay, most people can manage that, and we will talk about some techniques about how to get there. But that bit's quite straightforward. The next bit is trickier. After we've got a customer interested, our job then is to pivot the conversation and ask the customer about their needs. And when we are asking the customer about their needs, they start to tell us information, they start to share ideas, they start to share maybe some of their challenges, maybe some of the things that they are struggling with. And as they do that, they move themselves from interested to having some kind of desire to either want to change or to learn about something else that you can help them with. And when that desire to change it happens, it sounds something like the customer saying, well, how can you help with that? Or what would you recommend, right? That's the point at which we can start to talk about a solution. Here's how we help other customers like you to get that improvement in their practice, for example. And when we talk about a solution, the idea then is that we move the customer to a point where they're prepared to take action. And when a customer is prepared to take action, our job is then to say, okay, here's a proposal. Here's how it works. And at an event or an exhibition, it might be, here's how you place an order. Okay, it could be that simple. That could be the proposal. In a more complex, longer sales cycle, it might be a formal proposal that you're going to produce and send to the customer. Once that proposal's in place, then what we want is for the customer not only to want to take action, but to become a customer. And the way that we make that happen, or the way we encourage the customer to make that happen, is that we create immediacy and urgency at the final stage of the conversation. And if we miss any of these steps, you think about these steps, right? If we miss the insight phase, we don't build credibility. If we miss the needs stage, we don't understand the customer well enough. If we miss the solution stage and the way that we present solution is off from where the customer is, we'll lose engagement. If we don't make the proposal and say this is what we recommend, we lose engagement. If we don't create immediacy and urgency, the customer could be prepared to buy, but then they never follow through. So we have to guide them through each of those steps. Now, that is the customer journey. I like to think of it as one step beyond that, which is actually we don't just want transactional customers. We want loyal clients who want to choose more products from us, who want to work with us more collaboratively, who want to take their eyes off price and think about value. And we do that through a process of review, reflection, and improvement. And that's the stages of our customer journey, drawing the customer up through each of their decision-making stages. And you'll see that as linear in that chart. The way I like to think about sales is that it happens in cycles. So we will go through a cycle in a sales conversation, and then we will repeat that cycle over and over again with customers to build loyalty, to create value, deepen and strengthen relationships, and make sure that we continue to grow from within our existing customers and new customers. So the model and the cycle looks more like this. All of the stages are the same, but we are thinking about how we continually improve as we go round that cycle. So let's talk about engaging customers. One of the questions that came up was, how do I engage customers that are walking past? So some of these things will be straightforward and obvious, but it's always useful to cover the foundations. The first, of course, is to make eye contact. We have to look people in the eye. If we don't make eye contact, it's really easy for people to pretend they haven't seen us and kind of avert their gaze and walk away. So we have to make eye contact. The second is that we have to manage ourselves, smile, be positive. The third is then we ask open questions. The fourth is we have to enjoy the conversation. If you enjoy the conversation, your customer will enjoy the conversation. And from there, you can segue to sales. And they are the 5 steps. Let's unpack them in a little more detail. So when we think about eye contact, we think about these first impressions. And first impressions are made very, very quickly. I don't know if anybody knows the average time it takes to make a first impression. Experts say it's somewhere between 3 and 7 seconds. Between 3 and 7 seconds. That's how quickly we make first impressions, or we assess people that we're engaging with. And so if we're looking away, either at your phone, then that makes prospects feel, or your customer feel, like invisible or unimportant. And we want to really balance eye contact. So steady, natural eye contact. We don't want to stare people out. We want to look them at the right point. And I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but what they show is that when you're having a professional relationship and conversation, eye contact is from the eyes up to the forehead. It's in this zone here. When you're having a personal conversation, you'll notice this. After I've told you this today, you'll notice this in conversations that you have with people. When it's a personal conversation, your eye contact is from the bottom side of the eye down to the mouth. And even when someone's making eye contact with you, you'll notice when it's a more personal nature, their eye is naturally drawn lower. When it's a professional conversation, the eye is naturally drawn higher. And this is something that happens unconsciously. We don't focus on it, it just happens. But it is something you can actually, train yourself to do. So if you want, at the start of a relationship with a customer, more professional, more respectful eye contact is here above. As your relationship strengthens, you can start to lower your eye contact. And actually, depending on the relationship that you want to form with a customer, you can then assess and judge what's happening. The great indicator for you is if you've got a customer and you notice their eye contact is lower, actually they're seeing it as a stronger personal relationship. So you can start to adjust accordingly and assess where you are with that customer. So eye contact first, really important. And it's one of those things that's really obvious. But I've had conversations with people where they perhaps haven't understood the importance of eye contact, and they're perhaps not as confident to look you in the eye. They're looking down or they're looking away. We have to recognize if it's something you're not used to doing, making eye contact and learning to hold eye contact is really important, because it makes someone else feel connected to you, and the lack of it makes them feel disconnected from you. So eye contact is really important. Just a quick side note, if you're doing any Zoom or Teams meetings, okay? If you're doing Zoom or Teams meetings, you may notice that in this meeting, it looks like I'm making eye contact. Okay. The reason for that is because I'm not looking at the picture of you. So if I look now to turn to the screen, I look at Lottie and Aidan, who are on camera. This is where that view is. If I want to look at you, this is where it is. But it immediately breaks eye contact. Okay. So where I've retrained my eye contact to is the lens of the camera. So the lens of the camera is eye contact with you. Looking at your picture is not. So it's a really useful tip. If you do a lot of Zoom or Teams meetings, look to the camera lens, retrain your eye. It really helps. So that's eye contact. Second is this is about you, right? So if you're at an event or an exhibition, or if you're engaging with customers, actually just priming yourself to smile, to be positive, because when you smile at someone, it's like smiles are contagious. You know this already, right? But I'm going to remind you, smiles are contagious. When you smile at someone, they kind of can't help but smile back. If you say hi and smile, someone will smile, right? Even if they don't feel like it. And we find that emotional states are contagious. So if you're positive, your positivity is going to be contagious to that customer, and you start to set the tone for that conversation and the interaction that will follow. And of course, nobody wants to buy from someone who's bored and grumpy. We have to be enthusiastic. The only caveat to that is to manage your enthusiasm so you're not so enthusiastic that it puts the customer off. So it's positive, it's engaging, it's curious, and we'll talk about how to build that right balance. But the smile is really important because it tends to make the other person smile, and that releases a level of dopamine and some endorphins that mean that person's much more susceptible to be influenced as well. So really useful to smile. Third, we said ask the right questions, ask open questions. So there's lots of types of questions. I'm a real fan of how and what. So I'll show you some examples in a moment. So how and what questions, and tell me about, to really draw people out. Tell me about that patient that always causes you the most problems, or tell me about that tricky cavity or restoration that you're having to make, or tell me about that fidgeting nervous patient. How do you deal with that? So we've got all sorts of ideas that we can use. Just that tell me about, or what, or how, can really help us to prompt that information. So those questions uncover needs, they uncover the wants that customer has, the desires, and of course the challenges. And the goal, of course, for us in those sales conversations is to listen more than you talk. If you find you're talking more than the customer, chances are that they're not being given the space to really open up and give you what you need, so that you understand what you need to do to be able to sell effectively to them. So we have to let them really open up. And you can see there's 5 benefits of open-ended questions. I love these. They encourage the customer to reflect. They capture their perspectives and ideas that you perhaps wouldn't immediately assume. They collect things that are unanticipated, not just for you, but sometimes for the customer, if you ask the right question. And they foster engagement and participation. And of course, they allow you to adapt to conversation that might go somewhere you weren't expecting when you ask the right conversation, when you ask the right question. So then fourth is about also, it's a kind of mindset principle, and this is about enjoying the conversation. So when you treat the conversation with your customer like a genuine chat that you're having, not a sales conversation or interrogation, and you're curious and you let them talk about themselves and their work and their lives, and you're relaxed and you're authentic, you will build trust much faster than if you're trying to immediately segue to sales. And I always think we should spend the first 5 minutes of a conversation letting someone relax, letting it feel natural, asking those questions way before we segue to sales. And that allows you to get, I think, to Jan's point earlier, it also allows you to think, actually, is this someone that's genuine? I think I want to have a conversation with and can go further, or is there resistance? Are they being a bit defensive? Or actually, there's someone that I think might be a time waster and is just going to talk my ear off for the next 15 minutes while I could be talking to other customers. So you can start to assess that in that early conversation, but enjoy it nonetheless, right? Enjoy the way that you're engaging with them nonetheless. And then fifth, of course, this is the step where we segue to sales. So we use questions, and you'll know this already, but it's worth re-establishing. You'll use questions to tease out the client needs. You're connecting the questions that you're asking, the answers that they're giving, to how you can help them. Okay, so you ask questions that are quite poignant and quite directed in terms of how you know you're going to create a need for that customer. And of course, the idea of these questions would create natural openings, the openings that link to a challenge they have and a solution that you know you can offer them to meet that challenge. And that really is, that's how we should be thinking about consultative sales. We're asking really good questions that link to challenges we know the customer has, where we can help them with a solution. And then, of course, when we're teasing out those questions and getting the customer to answer, that's when we can transition, quite gently to that's exactly where we help clients like you. And it allows you then to segue into a more sales-based conversation, but it is taking the customer through those natural stages first. And I want to share this with you because this is a conversation flow. This is one option. It's something that I've done multiple times at shows. So I just want to share this with you because I've found it works. And you don't have to take this verbatim. Please don't feel that that's the case. But you can develop your own version of this. So I will always start with, hello, how are you? And the interesting thing is I've been at shows where someone just says, I'll be walking past a stand, they go, hello, and I go, hiya, and I carry on walking. Right? And what they're not doing is following up with a question. So if they said to me, hello, how are you? I'd have to stop because I go, yeah, I'm good, thanks. And because we're polite in our society, I'd have to then say, yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you? And all of a sudden, I'm not completely captured at that point, but I've paused at the pace I was walking past, right? So, hello, how are you? Really important. That first question, hi, big smile, how are you? The customer answers, and then they'll ask you back, right? Then you can answer that question. Then the next step I would go to is, where have you traveled from today? So then they might say, oh, I'm not very far down the road, or they might say, oh, I came down last night, or they might say, well, it took me 2 hours. The trains were a nightmare this morning, and the conversation's in flow, right? And from there, you can empathize with that. Oh, that sounds difficult, but you made it here at last, right? And they go, yeah, that's right, right. So you've got something you're in common because you've both traveled to the location. You might have come down the night before. They might ask you, they might say, oh, when did you get here? And all of a sudden, you're building some common ground and rapport, okay? I would then say, and this, so as I say, this has worked for me multiple times. How are you finding the show so far, or the event so far, or the talks so far, or whatever it is? Right? How are you finding it so far? And then they'll tell you. So, oh, I haven't, they might say, I haven't been here long enough to know, or whatever. And then I might say, oh, well, what are you looking forward to today? So I really want to create some common ground around what they're looking to do or what they've achieved so far at the show. Then I might say, what's the best thing you've seen today? I mean, I'm interested. I've been asking people this question today. What's the best thing you've seen so far today? And they'll always answer. They'll say, oh, this great new piece of kit or tech, or I saw this talk on this topic and it was really interesting, told me something I didn't realize about whatever, right? And you go, okay, oh, well, tell me a bit more about that. And you can open up. And then once you've got that, what's the best thing you've seen today? I've said this multiple times and it works. Would it be okay if I try and improve upon that in our conversation? And normally they kind of smile and they go on then, let's see, what have you got? And you're in, right? Then you're in. Now, depending on who you are or who's in front of you, you might have qualified by just saying, when they said, where have you traveled in from? And they say, oh, I've traveled in from Yorkshire or Kent or whatever, Sussex, right? And you might say, oh, is there a practice there you're working in? Oh, right, yeah. What's your role in the practice? So they might say, oh, I'm the associate or the principal of the practice. All right, so you might do a bit of that qualification. But this kind of conversation flow really helps if you say, go, hello, how are you? Where have you traveled from? How are you finding it so far? What's the best thing you've seen so far? Would it be okay if I try and improve on that? I've used this kind of exact structure so many times. It's really useful. And then, of course, we segue to a sales conversation. Now, remember that the segue to that sales conversation is not an opportunity to start pitching at the customer. It's now an opportunity to ask them questions, about, so if you're selling them a type of product, okay, so in your mind, you're thinking, right, we've got a portfolio of products. I've probably got 2 or 3 focused products that I want to talk about at the show. I don't just want to go into talking about product. What I would probably say is I'd ask a question. And the type of question I would ask has to be, the right type of question. So you'll know from, I'm sure, your previous experience, but it's worth recapping. There are three types of questions. There are open questions, there are closed questions, and there are probing questions. Open questions get people talking about themselves, their practice, their business. And that's what we want to do. Now, we're early in the sales conversation. So we're down here at the insight needs stage. We want to ask open questions. So when we segue to sales, we don't segue and go, let me tell you all about this great product I can provide you with today. We might say, if it's a product for, let's say it's a restorative product, you might say, so I'd love to know, tell me a bit about how you operate in these types of restorative areas. When you're restoring this type of tooth or cavity, or this type of class 3 restoration, what would you use for that? And so you're asking the customer, and they'll tell you, so okay, so this is, they might talk about technique, they might talk about a product, but we're asking an open question. We get them to tell us about what it is they're doing. And then as we go through the customer journey, you'll have seen these stages, we go to probing questions, and I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. And then finally, at the end, we want to ask a closed question. So we've asked an open question. Tell me a bit about how you work in this area. Tell me about your procedures to do this kind of restoration, whatever it is. And then as they start to talk, probing questions are simply just saying, oh, tell me a bit more about that, or what else do you do, or what other products might you use for that? We're just trying to tease out the information for the customer so they start to tell us a bit more about how they're operating. And then, of course, there will be those customers, especially when you're at events and exhibitions, there'll be those customers for whom you meet inertia, where they say, oh, no, we're okay as we are, it works absolutely fine, right? And they might say to you, I'm using this type of procedure, and that does not work fine, because in your mind, that there are challenges with that procedure. Rather than saying to somebody, well, it can't be okay because I know it's a load of rubbish. Right, don't try that. What I suggest is, we got this question I learned years ago called the magic question. The magic question is when you meet inertia, or you meet someone that says we're okay as we are. What we say is, oh, it's good that you've got something that works for you. Out of interest, if you could change one thing about that procedure, if you could just change one thing, might be a product, might be the procedure, might be a solution, might be the supplier they're using. Okay, if you could change one thing, what would it be? And you'd be really surprised, because in my experience over the years, there's very rarely an absolutely perfect product. I know you will all disagree. You've all got one perfect product, good. But there's usually something someone will change. And so if you ask that question, if you could change one thing, you will get one answer. You can also then, once the customer tells you what that one thing is, you've got an opportunity, the door's open, you can start to then say, okay, so how does that impact the procedure? Or what have you tried to improve upon that? And all of a sudden, you've got a conversation about you being able to say, well, it's interesting because a lot of customers tell us that, and here's how we help them address it. And all of a sudden, you've segued into being able to talk about the product and the advantages and benefits of your product. So we use the questioning to open the door and create the opportunity. Now, once you've talked about your product, we're not going to go through that today because you are the product experts on your products. Once you've talked about your product, the next stage then is to close or ask for commitment. So ask for the sale. And this is one of those areas where for some people it feels really awkward. It feels really strange. And so what I learned years ago that helped me to overcome that feeling of, or it feels a bit icky to ask for commitment, I learned this principle we call the trial close. Okay. And it's like a pre-commitment question. So instead of saying, would you like to order? We would say something like, is there anything else we need to cover before we discuss an order? So that question is very deliberate. Is there anything else we need to cover before we discuss an order? Or if we went ahead with what we've discussed, would you be ready to place an order today? Okay. And it's a two-part question. And the idea of the two-part question is that it allows the customer, if there is something that's on that customer's mind that might be an objection to ordering today, then it allows them to surface it before you've actually said, will you place an order? And then because of the way you ask it, you can then handle that objection, and then you can trial close again. So it means you can ask every time without feeling icky. You give the customer breathing space so they can answer and raise an objection if they want. But ultimately, they might say, "No, that sounds good," and then you can close. Say, "Great," And if you're a manufacturer at that show, you might say, "Which dealer would you use for your orders?" If you're a distributor, you might say, "Okay, what have you got an account with us? What's the best way for us to process the order?" And you might say, "Would you like to set up an account if you haven't got one?" So it's a really natural way to, we call it a trial close. It's a pre-closing question that allows the customer space to raise an objection, for you to handle it if you need to, and then close. And this again, there are small things that make a real difference in the sales process. This is one of the small things that makes a big difference if you get it right. So asking for commitment every time is really important. We talked about the ROI required at events and exhibitions. If we get this bit right, if we're always asking for commitment, you will gain many more orders and commitments from customers than you would if you're not asking each time. And then we think that's the end. It isn't the end. We have another stage, which is immediate action. So what I like to do is, even if someone says, "Yes, please, I'd like to place an order," so then we say, "Yeah, okay, great. Let's take the details of the order." So actions you're going to take to process the order. You'll talk about the timing of those actions. So we'll get this processed, as part of our follow-up from the show. Might be on that day, it might be the day after, might be, depending on if the show's out like a weekend, it might be on the Monday. But make sure that the client, the customer, knows that they're the timing of your actions. And then you say to the client, "So if we process that Monday, you should receive it by," know what day they'll receive it. And I'd love to talk to you about how you get on with it. So you're then going, right, what are the next steps beyond them placing the order and that discussion? And when can you book in some time, even if it's like 15 minutes over lunchtime or at the end of a day, to check in and see how they've got on with it? Because if you don't do that follow up, you risk one of two things happening. The product gets ordered and sits on a shelf and is never used, or the product's ordered, and then even if it is used, you then can't get the feedback from the customer. And then your ability to repeat that order is really difficult or limited because you haven't got access to the customer. So getting that next scheduled kind of appointment, or at least a check-in with that customer, really, really valuable. Even if it's not you that does that, if it's one of your colleagues that does that, if you're on a stand and that customer's not within your geographical territory, then you would hand that on to one of your colleagues. But that follow-up is really, really important. And I always like to think, to kind of final bit on this, is that when we think about the sales process, I think about the driver's seat and the passenger seat in a car. And we know, of course, there's only one steering wheel in the front of a car. And anytime we don't have the next meeting booked, we've effectively taken our hands off the wheel and we've lost control of the sales process. The customer is now driving. And if we don't have that control, then the customer has it, and then we're at their beck and call around timing and urgency. So we have to maintain that control. Okay, we are coming up towards our close. So it's 8 minutes to 2. It's gone really quickly for me. I don't know about you. Hopefully it's gone quickly for you as well. Enthusiasm, I always like to say, has a half-life. So I'd love for you to think about, right, what are your key actions from today's workshop? Maybe one or two things that you think, yeah, okay, I'm going to use that at the next event or exhibition, or even in your customer conversations. Just what are a couple of things that you're going to take away? Drop them into the chat if you don't mind for me, so that we can capture those. I'll read those out in a sec. I'm going to check that we've covered all of the comments from today. Jan's question, I think the only one that we haven't commented on specifically was Jan's question about how to get rid of time wasters when lots of people are waiting to see you. So the way that I do that, Jan, is closed questions. Closed questions, always be polite, so you're reducing the amount of talk time with that customer. And then I also signal to the customer. So I'd always be polite, but I'd say, "I hope you don't mind, I've got another customer waiting to see me. Would it be okay if we pick this up next time I see you?" And just segue into, "Great to see you. Thanks so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the show, or enjoy the rest of your day. Lovely to see you," and go. Okay, so you can make that really polite, really nice, but quite assertive as well. That would be the way I would handle that. Okay, let me talk about the BDIA sales training, and then I'm going to open up for questions. So if you've got any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat while I'm doing this. I like to think about, when we look at sales training and coaching, I like to think about 5 things. So when you're learning, we want a confidential environment. You want to feel like you can explain what's really going on for you, and that's not going to go any further outside of the room. So confidentiality is really important. Community is important. Knowing that you are in a room with like-minded people. Collaborating is important. Knowing that you can share ideas, pick up ideas, and take those forward. Challenge is important. Challenging assumptions, challenging beliefs, challenging your perspectives. Really important as part of any coaching program that you might go through. And then, of course, commitment, which is commitment to actually do something with what you're learning and change. So these are 5 elements that we really try and bake into all of our programs. And then when we think about the sales training that we've got coming up in February, this is how it works. So we have what we call a sales scorecard, where we invite you to take the scorecard to assess your sales capability today. We then do 2 days immersive sales training and coaching. We give you access to all the models and resources, the book, digital and paperback. We give you 2 sales mastermind follow-up coaching classes. And then there's a private WhatsApp group. And we have this new AI sales coach tool where you get 24/7 access to that. So that's an AI, a chat GPT, custom GPT, where you can ask it any questions and it will coach you on your sales approach. So if you are interested in that at all, feel free to contact me. It's on Thursday the 12th and Friday the 13th of February. Be in the East Midlands area. Venue to be confirmed once we've finalised the programme. And if you'd like to take the scorecard, then feel free to take the scorecard. I'll send you an email after today. I'll put the scorecard link in there, but you can see the link for the scorecard on the screen, and it will give you a personal development plan, an overall score, and score in 5 areas. Thanks to those of you who've got to go, no problem, I understand. And in terms of what's next, if you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'll drop these 2 links into the chat. If we're not connected on LinkedIn and you'd like to connect, feel free to do that. Let me put that in the chat there. If you are interested in anything we've talked about today, or if you have any questions you'd like to contact me one-to-one, my email is also in the chat, and you should have received my email on the calendar invitation for today's session as well. Okay, we are at 4 minutes to 2. I'm a minute over my planned time. I plan to finish at 5:02, so apologies for the extra minute. We'll wrap up here. But if anybody has any questions and you would like to stay on and ask me those questions, feel free to stay on. I'm happy to wait another 5 or 10 minutes. But if you do need to go and you've got 2 o'clock and you're racing off, feel free to jump off. And I will be adding this session onto. We'll be sending it to the BDIA. I have a private group. I'll put it on that portal as well, Lottie. Yes, so you'll have access to it afterwards, and we can share that with your team as well, because they're part of the BDIA as well. Thank you, Lottie. Thanks everyone for joining. Really enjoyed this session. Thanks everybody. If there are any other questions, feel free to hang around and ask. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I hope it's sunny and warm where you are. It is here, and long may that continue. For as much of the autumn as possible. Okay, thank you, everybody. Thanks for the comments as well. Glad you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it as well. So thanks so much for listening and joining. And hope to see you at a future show and maybe even at a future course. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Justin.
Pleasure, Lottie. Lovely to see you. Thanks for joining.
I think after our conversation that we had, I was like, I just need questions. I need specifics. I need something I can just go. So yeah, that's definitely answered a lot more. Like, I feel a lot better to go into the shows now. So thank you.
You've got some ideas. You can use them.
Yes. Yeah. I was taking some photos throughout. So I'm going to go write a little notebook later and just have a sales page of just like.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'll send you the slides as well, so you have the slides.
Thank you. Yeah, that's amazing. Thanks.
And then you can steal as much as you want to your
heart. Thank you very much, Justin. Lovely to see you.
Pleasure. Nice to see you, Lottie. Take care. See you.